afternoon. I'm Albert Carnesdale, Dean of Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, and it's my privilege to host this afternoon's event. The last time that our speaker came to the John F. Kennedy School of Government was in the fall of 1991. He was accompanied by his boss, then the governor of Arkansas. This forum was packed. Today, our speaker comes without the same boss, who is now President of the United States. And I think the forum is even more packed. Now, the logic may be twisted, but we can conclude that all of those people who we thought in 1991 were coming to see the governor of Arkansas were actually just trying to get a glimpse of George Stephanopoulos. I'm delighted to welcome him back to the Kennedy School on this occasion of our alumni weekend. Mr. Stephanopoulos attended Columbia University, was graduated there, and went on to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. Rhodes Scholar. Sounds familiar. His introduction to Capitol Hill came in 1983 as an assistant to Ohio Representative Edward Fagan, and he returned in 1989 to work for House Majority Leader Richard Gephardt. His exposure to national campaigning came in 1988 as head of the Rapid Response Team for the Dukakis-Benston campaign. It's said that in the wake of that election, the Dukakis campaign team went off to Hilton Head, South Carolina, to recuperate. There they wrote a screenplay about a Democratic governor who fought back and won the presidency. 4 years later, Mr. Stephanopoulos won a starring role in the movie and rave reviews for his performance. Campaign manager James Carville, known in some circles as the Ragin' Cajun, said, and I quote, "If George's IQ could be converted to Fahrenheit, that boy could boil water." Carville also said that he wishes he had a daughter, just so she could marry George. We won't tell Mary Madeline. President Clinton, who describes Mr. Stephanopoulos, his appearance as, quote, angelic funk, close quote, says that no matter how hard George works, no matter how much pressure he is under, he's always cool under fire, close quote. In his current position, Mr. Stephanopoulos maintains his firm grasp on the issues, serves as one of the president's closest confidants, and deals with a press corps that believes that its honeymoon with the Clinton administration ended just before the inauguration. Mr. Stephanopoulos blends political savvy with his new status as a cultural icon. A sociologist at Northwest University who has done extensive work on Greek Americans says that Mr. Stephanopoulos combines brains, this quote, brains, bucks, and baklava, close quote. And Richard Moe, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Walter Mondale, said of Mr. Stephanopoulos, quote, "He's as good as anybody I know, and certainly better than anyone his age, at finding the nexus between politics and policy, which is a rare talent," close quote. It's a rare talent indeed, and one that we value and nurture here at this school. Now, it's especially pleasing to me, as dean of this school, to reverse the flow, at least for one afternoon, of people from this institution to Washington, and have somebody from the Clinton administration coming the other way. Please join me in welcoming the Assistant to the President and Director of Communications, George Stephanopoulos.
Let the record show that there are fewer people here than we're here for the President. That's what I'm going to tell him. I'm also going to tell James that I'm not interested in his daughter, even if he has one. Actually, I remember very well the visit here in October of 1991. It was very early in the campaign. And it was my first trip with the governor of Arkansas, and it was our first trip up north, first time we were going on to New Hampshire. And I think at that time, none of us could honestly say that we thought all that much was going to come of it. We thought that at the least we would have a good debate on ideas for the next year. Bush still looked pretty unbeatable. And it wasn't at all clear that a little-known governor of Arkansas would ever be able to make his case to the people of Harvard or the people of New Hampshire or the people of New York. A lot of times during the campaign it didn't look like we could either. But something very special happened that night. It really was. There were more people there that night, and it was packed. It was a cold night in October. And the president came up here first and spoke to several members of the faculty. I remember especially the prosecutor in the Central Park jogging case was here that night. And she spoke to the president about what she saw in the eyes of the young men who carried out that horrible crime. And the president came out that night and talked for about 20 minutes about the range of his programs, and then went and took questions. And what was different from anything I had seen before in politics was the seriousness of the debate and the real engagement, even at that early stage. Not only that we saw in this room, and then as we went on to New Hampshire and beyond, the real seriousness that we saw all the American people taking that election. And I think it was one of the things that carried the governor, now the president, through a long campaign. People were determined to make it about the issues. People were determined to make it about them. And people were determined to make it serious. And it's been an awful long time since that night. But clearly one of the things that we want to do in this administration is try and keep that level of debate going. I really appreciate, first of all, Dean Carnisoff for that great introduction. I really appreciate my good friend Nick Metropolis for giving me the chance to reflect on that experience and sort of where we go from here. But I got to tell you, when he first called, I thought he made a mistake. I didn't know you could come to the Institute of Politics after you won an election. I'd also like to, I'll come after we lose, believe me, I'll take the invitation. I'd also like to thank Governor Dukakis for coming today. I know that Dean pointed out that I was part of his rapid response team in that election. That probably explains why the governor slapped me with a malpractice suit on the way in the door today. Seriously, I mean, I think that a lot can be said about that campaign and what went wrong and what went right, but I don't think that anybody can ever say that the governor didn't conduct himself with integrity and vision. And if we can achieve half of the things that you talked about in that campaign, and that we continue to talk about in education and health care and turning this economy around in our administration, we'll all be grateful. Thank you. It's now been several months since the victory, and obviously it was a pretty heady experience. It's an awful lot to get used to, but all these events tend to deflate you very quickly, and it kind of started out the day after the election. I gave my first press conference as a presidential to-be spokesman, and I was ready. I sort of studied the papers that morning. I looked over what was happening in foreign policy and what was happening in the economy, and was prepared for a really tough sell on the important issues of our day. And then in front of 1,000 people, a reporter got up, I called on her, and the first question of my first press conference was, how long did the president sleep last night, and what did he have for breakfast? Then they followed up with, what did Sox have for breakfast? Which became a 2-day story. And I'm also getting used to getting a lot of helpful hints, not only in the mail, but in person. Last week, one of my assistants came up here to Boston and was seeing his grandmother. And he asked her before he left, do you have any advice for the administration before I go back? And she said, yeah, tell George to cut his hair. And he said, well, that's the way his barber cuts it. He says, that's the way it looks best. She said, well, tell him he's overcharged. But probably the most deflating thing came just a few weeks ago. When Laura Tyson, I don't know if you know her, but she's our chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, And she brought her son in, who's about 7 or 8, because he said he really wanted to meet me. I showed him my office, I showed him the TVs, I showed him the desk. And Laura said, she said, now Eric, tell George what he does. And she said, well, it's his job to get up there and tell everyone why it's not the president's fault. Now that about sums it up. So I guess I'm here today close to the end of the first 100 days to tell you why everything that went right is the president's responsibility and why everything that went wrong is not his fault. But I would like to leave a lot of time for questions because I'm a lot more used to that. But let me spend just a few minutes talking about, first of all, how the White House works. Just, what the day-to-day life is like, what we've done and what we're trying to do. And finally, close with just a little bit on where we go from here and why it all matters. I know you've probably all heard a lot of jokes about the White House. We're peopled by a bunch of kids in their 20s, and it's true. But there actually is a method to the madness that it might appear to the outside world. We've actually redesigned the White House staff. It is now designed to have 3 different policy councils. The National Security Council, which is traditional National Security Council, although with the addition of the Treasury Secretary and the National Economic Advisor. We also have a National Economic Council, which deals with the range of interagency economic issues, and that's headed by Bob Rubin, but also includes members of the entire economic and healthcare team. And finally, a Domestic Policy Council, headed by Carol Rasko, which deals with the range of domestic policy issues, whether it's welfare reform or empowerment issues, urban policy. And their job is to organize the government so that all of the cabinet agencies work together on developing policies. I mean, we all learned from our predecessors that often the biggest enemy of the president is his own government. And we're doing what we can to try and coordinate as much as we can out of the White House, not in a dictatorial way, but in a way that we can understand that everybody knows what's going on. When I think about how we do our work, I think that a lot of people up here might not necessarily feel all that uncomfortable. Because if there's anybody who works in a university or works in the faculty would probably feel very welcome in the first floor of the West Wing. I think that when most Americans think of the White House, they have this image of the Oval Office, and clearly the Oval Office is, the seat of the presidency. It's where he does his best work. But I think in our administration, if you're going to pick a room that is the heart and soul of the administration, it's a room to the side of the Oval Office, and it's called the Roosevelt Room. And the entire West Wing is built around it. It's a big office filled with an oval table. It's pretty much like any seminar room that you might have in the university, and it's all of our offices are off to the side of it. And it is in this room that the real work of the administration is done, whether it's the preparation of the economic plan, the preparation of the plan for the aid to Russia, or the health care plan that we're now in the process of devising. The way the president works, and I can just paint a picture for you, there's a big oval table. He sits on one side, the vice president sits across from him, and any number of members of the cabinet or members of the White House staff will sit with him in a ring around the table, and then their deputies on the outside, and we engage in seminars. The economic plan was a lengthy one. It took about 20 days, but we literally sat in that room for 20 days, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours a day, and threw the ideas back and forth. The president generally listens during those meetings, might call on people for a little sense of direction, rarely tips his hand. But this is where he gets all the input from the government. The same, as I said, for the program on aid to Russia, and I think it's been well reported, but I can say it again here. When he first received a lot of the recommendations on aid to Russia, he said, this isn't good enough. We have to go much farther. And it is, again, in this process where a cabinet secretary, for at least a little while, has the same standing as a deputy assistant to the president, that the ideas are hashed out and gone over and developed. And I think this is the way the president wants it, relatively egalitarian, open exchange of ideas, and then he retreats to the quiet of his office for the final decisions. Unfortunately, we also write speeches in that office sometimes, which makes for a little bit of nervousness at the end. I don't know if you saw, but in his first speech to the nation from the Oval Office, these things, I'm sure under Reagan they probably had it all done a week ahead of time, and he had memorized all his lines. But I can honestly say that we haven't always served the president well in the speechwriting department. In that case, there were about 12 of us sitting around the Roosevelt room. It got to be 7:30, and the speech was at 9, and we're still sitting there writing, and he was throwing things back. It got to be 8:15, and usually it's my role at this to start jumping up and down and saying, I don't care what it says anymore, just get it done. But the president's a much more disciplined taskmaster than I am, and he sits there and calmly writes it out. We finally got that speech into the teleprompter at 10 minutes to 9, which all of us had lost about 5 pounds through sweat and blood, and he still sat there behind the desk and just calmly ran through it, and at 9:01 he gave it. I hope we're going to improve our service to him on this over the next several months. But that's just a little bit of how the office works, how the work is done. The president generally he's in the office from about 8 to 6 every day. Most of his day in the White House is a public day. He's either meeting with outside groups or having these kinds of meetings I described, and he does most of his reading and studying either at night in the residence or in a study off to the side of the Oval Office, or very early in the morning sometimes. He is working quite hard, although not as hard as he was before, because he realizes that there is an awful long way to go. And that is made for long hours in the White House staff, but we're all getting a lot more sane about it. As far as what we've done and what we're trying to do, I think you can all give us credit for a brilliant start. The way we fought up the inaugural with losing an attorney general and then having a week on gays in the military was exactly as we had planned. But seriously, actually, we did. You should see the memo. We came in here with a lot of problems to solve that had to be addressed in a very short period of time. There were some things the president could do on his own. As you all know, within the first 2 weeks of his office, he, with a stroke of a pen by executive order, overturned 5 abortion regulations that had limited the right to choose for the last decade. And we were also able to achieve congressional passage of a bill that had been sitting for 7 years, the Family and Medical Leave Act, which said, you know what it said. But the heart of our first 100 days is the heart of the election. It's the economic plan. And the president set the tone with his State of the Union again, a speech that was written largely by him at the podium, about 40%, but it was brilliant. And this has been the heart of our plan because we have to do so much. After 12 years, as you all know, we're saddled with a deficit, but not only a budget deficit, an investment deficit in the kinds of things that will make our people and our economy richer in the long run, investing in education, investing in healthcare, investing in job training. And it's made for very difficult choices and very difficult trade-offs over the first several months. We're frankly very pleasantly surprised by the reception. I mean, it's not every day that a president comes out and raises taxes, cuts Medicare, and cuts Social Security and goes up in popularity. And we also know that it's not something that's going to last unless we continue to make the case, not only for the deficit reduction, but also for the investments. I think one of the things that we've been wary of and disappointed in over the course of the discussion of the economic plan is that often in this budget-cutting mania that develops, people lose sight of the fact that we're also going to have to make these investments if we're going to be a wealthy nation in a decade or 15 or 20 years. But so far, we've had great success. I mean, the president's budget passed in record time. It passed in 6 weeks. No president has passed it that quickly. Obviously, as you all know, we're still hung up on the jobs portion of the package, thanks to a small minority in the Senate who figured out that, who somehow got this idea that the people still want gridlock after 12 years, but we're going to continue to fight them, and I hope we're going to have some resolution of that early this week, because when you look at the economic plan in all, it is essentially a fundamental reversal of what happened in the last 12 years. We invest in Head Start. We invest in the program for women and infants and children. We have what could be a revolutionary change in our tax policy. by adding money to the Earned Income Tax Credit, which essentially means that if you work in this country and you have 2 kids, you will no longer live in poverty. That's a revolutionary change, and we're going to have to fight for that over the next several months to make sure it works, even as we reduce spending in areas of government which are less essential, and even as we bring down the defense budget while trying to still provide for the investments in retraining the workers and military personnel who will be thrown out of work by the cuts in the defense budget. So we hope we have about 3 more months to go on that. It's going to be a difficult fight, but we're going to keep on fighting right up until the end, and hopefully we'll have something worked out this week on the jobs package. The next big hurdle and the next big project for the president is one I'm sure you're all aware of, the health care, and the health care task force headed by Mrs. Clinton. Yeah, go ahead, you can clap for her. We're in this phase now, which is, I'm getting more used to. It's the pre-decision making phase on policies, and it's a phase when anything you say can and will be used against you. You notice that was our other brilliant strategy, the way we came out with a VAT tax on tax day. That was, it's counterintuitive, but there's something there. So I can't say too much about the decisions that the president's going to make, except to say that, the goals of the program are to provide, to get costs under control, to provide Americans with the kind of security they need to feel that no matter what happens, if they lose their job, if a family member gets ill, they won't lose their health insurance, which is one of the most crushing burdens on most Americans' family. Most Americans like the healthcare system. They know it has to be changed. They understand it. They want the security that it provides, but they have this tremendous fear that something's going to change and take it all away, and that would bankrupt their family or ruin them. And we're going to try and come up with a system that provides that security while also making progress on access for all Americans. And if you have that kind of universal system, we hope we can bring costs down. But the decisions on that will be made over the next several weeks, and we hope to have an announcement by the end of May. At the same time, we've had set up a number of working groups which are working on the other central programs the president wants to come forward with. We hope by the end of April to have a real campaign finance reform bill that can pass the Congress. We are also developing an urban policy based on the idea of community development banks and enterprise zones. Again, we hope to have an announcement on that within the next several weeks, as we do with welfare reform. And finally, I know I see my friends from City Year here. The president, hopefully, will be announcing his national service plan by the end of the month, so that by the end of the first 100 days, we will have made substantial progress on our economic plan, come close to the introduction of our health care plan, and then also at least achieve the first step in the other major areas that the president outlined in his campaign: welfare reform, campaign finance, urban policy, and national service. At the same time, the last huge effort we faced in the first 100 days, as you all know, was our relations with Russia. I mean, the president deeply believes that we're facing an historic moment, that investing in the future of Russian reform and democracy in Russia is not only investment in their future, but an investment in ours, because, first of all, anytime democracy expands, it's good for America, but also if we have a Russia that's working, a Russia where an economy is growing, that will provide more trade and investment opportunities for the American people. And I got to say, you could really feel that. I was privileged enough to go to the summit in Vancouver, and it was entirely like anything, at least I had ever studied. I mean, I did a fair amount of Russian politics in college, and at that time, it was all studying the Cold War and the structure of the Soviet system and arms control. And frankly, there wasn't much time spent on arms control at this summit. It was all focused on the economy and how to make the investments in Russia that will make a difference over time. And I think you could feel it especially. Something that I hadn't thought too much about before, but at one point, President Yeltsin said, it's insulting for you all to keep up these Jackson-Vanik restrictions. I don't know if you know what those are, but they were restrictions on trade caused by our reaction to the Soviet system in the early 70s, having mostly to do with emigration of Soviet Jews, and it changed your thinking. You said, wait a second, we're a democracy. We're an entirely different nation from the one that was there when these laws were written, and you simply have no standing to keep these kind of restrictions in place. Now, obviously, we have to make sure that the immigration situation is continuing. There are still some refuseniks left in Russia, but he makes a point. We are facing a new world, and we have to deal with it in new ways. That has been the biggest foreign policy issue for the president, and it's, it leads me into a slightly different area. We got a reputation in the campaign for being able to stay focused and being able to stay, on the central ideas of the election, which we thought were the economy and healthcare and the general idea of change. One of the first things you learn as you work in the White House is that you have a lot less control than you think over the agenda. The president's voice is very powerful, no question about it, and we can set an awful lot of things in motion with his actions. But at the same time, you're also not going to be able to stay completely focused because the world intrudes. Obviously, right now we're spending an awful lot of time dealing with the tragic situation in Bosnia, to which there are no easy or good answers. We have expended a great amount of diplomatic effort on the situation in Haiti. Again, something that even as you seem to be moving closer, things can often take a step or two back. And then not to mention all of the crazy domestic problems that just pop up, whether it's Waco or the prison in Ohio or the bombing at the World Trade Center. The president has to deal with these issues, and one of the things that we're often struggling with is the tension between trying to stay on your agenda and doing the work that a president has to do. Secondly, and I think the experience with the jobs program has shown all of us that we probably didn't have a sufficient understanding of the Senate filibuster. It's just one of the things we have to learn. We have a majority in the House, we have a majority in the Senate, but you face a situation where if even 2 or 3 Republicans fail to come to your side, they can block everything, and that's something we're going to have to really pay a lot of attention to over time. And then finally, I guess the nature of communications is changing entirely. We saw a lot of it in the campaign, with the 24-hour news cycle caused by CNN and the sort of supplements provided by talk radio. But I don't think any of us fully appreciates yet what this means for the political system. What you saw with Zoe Baird was if something catches on talk radio, there's no stopping it. I mean, it's impossible to stop. And that often leads you to making decisions in a very rushed way, which might not necessarily be healthy, not to mention just the daily grind of reacting to the press changes. It's always been there, but now when you have sort of instant and total communication, it does change the way you have to work. Finally, I guess I just want to spend a couple minutes in the end trying to talk about the deeper things the president was trying to do in the campaign and what we hope we can achieve in the White House. In the end, this president or this administration is not going to be judged simply by the success of our legislative agenda. After all the programs are written, after the battles are won and lost, after they're analyzed, he is also going to be judged by the values that he brings to the office and the spirit that he sparks in the country. And, I think that one of the things that plagues him and that plagues all of us, the question we ask ourselves is how do we go about building the bonds of community in the country? And I think that obviously today is a good day to reflect on that. Today there's a great sense of relief over the verdicts in Los Angeles. I think what it shows people is that justice can be served in this country, that it proves to a lot of us what a lot of people had thought had been true, that Rodney King's civil rights clearly were violated on the night of that beating, and it sends a signal across the country that the system can work. And it makes me think, just about a year ago, we were in Los Angeles, and it was a very different kind of a day. We flew into Los Angeles late at night, the weekend after the riots, and we landed, and there were police along the highway, and nobody was in the streets, and the lights were out. And we went to Cecil Murray's AME church, and the president just bowed his head in prayer with the members of that congregation, the members of that church, and never have I ever felt like it was so needed in this country, because as you walk through those streets, you realize that this wasn't the country that we were told about. It wasn't the country that we were brought up in, that if something out of the scale that we saw in Los Angeles could happen, then we were all at risk, not only materially, but in a far deeper way. Today's is a much different day. We have relief, and maybe this verdict today can give us the breathing space to address the underlying problems and ask the tough questions that have to be asked when you live in a society that still remains very deeply divided. You know, how can we be satisfied when we live in a country where in certain cities many young men and women believe that their only possible option to a better life is to turn to crime, and when their counterparts in the wealthier parts of the city believe that their only option is to hide or to arm themselves or to be afraid? How can we be satisfied when in so many schools in the cities of this country, the kids go to school and they're trapped, trapped between the very real hope that somehow the school will work and somehow they will get an education and somehow they will be able to lift themselves above their surroundings, and the very real fear that at any moment somebody can walk into the school and blow them away. And how can we be satisfied that when so many of the most privileged people in the society believe that the only rational response to this is to essentially, as your former colleague here at the Kennedy School, Bob Reich, points out, secede, go into their own communities, go into their own suburbs, pay for their own security, pay for their own roads, pay for their own health care, and allow the rest of society to fend for themselves. I think that at its best moments in the campaign, the president addressed these fundamental questions. Whether it was on the bus trips where people came out and said, we want something new, or whether it was in forums like this at the Kennedy School, or whether it was in countless living rooms across this country, where he heard for the first time the line that he repeated in his State of the Union speech, where he said, the test of our policy, the test of this administration can't just be what's in it for me, but it has to be what's in it for us. And at its best moments of so far these first 80 whatever days, we've seen that same kind of feeling, that same kind of involvement. I mean, one of the things I think we're proudest of is that if we go at the rate we're going, there are going to be 10 million letters coming to the White House over the next year, which is multiples more than has ever been the case before. People are in touch. Too bad, we've cut the staff by 25%, so we can't answer them. But the sense that people are involved and connected to their government and their community is something that we want to continue to foster, because last November we believed that the American people took a gamble. They risked change and voted for a young governor from a small state who, as he said in the convention, still believed in a place called hope. And that sounds really sweet and sentimental, but what we're committed to every day is trying to make that change happen, knowing that we don't have all the answers, but we're believing that we have to try. And when we say we believe in a place called hope, we don't mean it just as a sentiment, but as an obligation. Because these problems are tough, and it's very easy, believe me, I end up on this side a lot of times, to be skeptical, to be cynical, to say, it just can't work, there are too many problems, we can't do this, we cannot bring people together, we can't make a difference. But if you see hope as an obligation, then it kind of gives you a little bit of a kick. And we're going to continue to act with the conviction that the ultimate test and the ultimate challenge of this administration is to keep that spirit alive, to make people believe that the government can work for them, and to convince every American, whether they're in Harvard or Harlem, that they do have a stake in the common success of this administration and a real personal responsibility to make it happen. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you. There is some evidence that people already know the system. There are 4 microphones, 2 here, 2 there. Ordinarily, I, or whoever is moderating, is the one that points to people and asks the questions. I would appreciate it if you would identify yourselves and then ask the questions, but in this case, since we have a real expert, he can do it himself.
This is something I'm used to. Go ahead.
My name is Troy Grayson. I'm a junior at the college and vice chair of the Student Advisory Committee here at the IOP. My question is about one of the criticisms that some Reagan Democrats have leveled at the Clinton administration, that you talk right and walk left. Maybe that's like too great of a characterization of that, but there might be some kernel of truth in that, and I wonder what your response would be to that.
I think it's a little more complicated than that. I understand the analysis. I mean, I think what they point to is, they say that you talked about all these values, but at the same time, something that people here would agree with, but you overturn the abortion restrictions, or you're trying to change the social agenda in some way. But I think that that's probably coming to judgment way too soon. I mean, the fact is that a lot of the orders that people would point to make that case, whether it's gays in the military or abortion, are things that can be done and should be done by executive action. I mean, these are very easy to do. You sign a piece of paper, and you have a change in policy. A lot of the deeper programs we've been trying to pass, whether it's welfare reform, which was one of the signatures of our campaign and is now being developed by another Harvard alumnus, David Ellwood, take time, they take money, they're in development, but they're not something you can achieve, by a stroke of a pen. But that is breaking things down in a way I know the president would also resist. He said time and time again that we're not right or left, but it's different, and it is different, and it's complex, and we're going to continue to look for programs that work, no matter how people label them. And frankly, I think that those labels can lose their meaning. I mean, is welfare reform when you give people the training and the education they need to pull themselves out of poverty, but then require them to work? I mean, is that right, or is it left? Is opening up the women's right to choose, which is based on the principle of privacy, which is a very conservative notion, right or left? I mean, I think that those kinds of arguments break down the closer you look at them, but mostly what we're dealing with is a timing problem, I would say.
Hi, my name is Justin Ladis, and I am the co-chair of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Caucus here at the Kennedy School. I would be interested if you could give me a sense of where you think the Clinton's efforts to overturn the ban will end up, and also what I and others can do to support his efforts for a complete overturn.
He said yesterday he thinks it's going to win on July 16th when he met, the first meeting ever in the Oval Office with members of gay and lesbian groups. It's not going to be easy. Right now we're in a state of review. The Defense Department has set up one inside group and one outside group to review the policy. As you know, Senator Nunn is having his hearings, as is Representative Dellums in the House Armed Services Committee. It's certainly not going to be easy. I mean, and if you're asking for my advice, which you may or may not welcome, I think it's really important in this issue to focus on the narrow but deep questions. I mean, the president has said that he simply doesn't believe that people should be discriminated against simply because of who they are. And the more that people try and expand that principle and instead turn it into something of affirming or putting the government behind a lifestyle that the government should be neutral on, the less successful we'll be. And I think that there's a lot of tensions, I think, probably within the gay and lesbian community itself over how to go about that. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to have a much more proactive policy. I just don't think, putting on my political hat, that that's viable. And that you have to establish the principle of non-discrimination, stand by it as firmly as you can, but try and respect the views of the rest of society as well.
My name is Jason Snipes. I'm a Kennedy School student and co-chair of the Black Student Caucus here. My question, I guess, stems from your discussions of sort of the social contract issues with regard to the LA riots. They seem to be a sort of a reflection of the fact that with regard to the communities of color, there's a feeling that the social contract has been sort of rent. And in light of the fact that you see over and over again maybe changes in the focus on are these problems important, whose fault are the problems of people in urban communities of color, what you see changes in that, but you see sort of consistent worsening really in the actual standards of living. And you don't see much change, and it's going to be really difficult to mount the sort of consistent political support that's going to result in that kind of change. How does the Clinton administration see itself as addressing these problems in a real way? And what does it see as its responsibility, particularly given the fact that Clinton actually lost the white vote, I believe, and was pretty much elected because he had so much support from communities of color? That's what I've heard.
I don't think it's true. But to answer your question, you do it first by paying attention to it, by not running away. That's first and most important. We've had teams of people out in Los Angeles and several other cities across the country over the course of the spring as we develop our urban policy, and you listen and you're in touch and you do your best to understand the community, understand its problems. That's first. Second of all, you come up with programs that address the real problems. As I said, we're in the process of developing an urban policy, and I think that one of the things the president pretty deeply believes is that you have to foster self-help in the communities, and that's done whether it's through the earned income tax credit by rewarding people for work, or whether it's through a welfare reform policy that again gives the money people need for education and training and child care, but also has a pretty stringent work requirement. That also you come up with investment policies that try and reverse the practice now where if you live in a minority community, you simply can't get a loan to start a business and help yourself, because if you don't have that investment from the community itself, you'll always face the kinds of problems you face with LA, where there's the tension between the people who own the businesses, who make the investments, and those who live in the community. There has to be a real integration, not only social but economic. I mean, in so many cities, you hear this time and time again. I think that there's one bank in South Central LA that loans to people from the community. That's just simply, it's unacceptable. There's no way that community can generate itself if they don't have the means to do it. So those are the specific policy ideas that the president is addressing. But then finally, you have to, rather than look backwards, I mean, look to the future, and that's only going to happen as well if you get a hold of kids at a very young age in the schools and make those schools work. Now, there's a limited federal involvement there, but we have to do what we can to encourage that in the states as well. That's just a sketch, but I think that's the start. Sarah.
Well, Sue Ludwig, a Harvard student. Earlier you were talking about the restructuring of the Soviet Union, and that is a new age now. We have a economic aid policy and getting rid of trade embargoes. Our old enemy is no longer our old enemy. We have a new philosophy towards them. Will this philosophy also, do you think, apply to Vietnam in the future with their trade embargo? Or is the information for POWs the main bargaining chip that you're using to keep the embargo in place?
Both. I mean, yes, we would. I mean, it's conceivable that we would have normalized relations with Vietnam, but we can do it only after we have some sort of accounting on the POWs and MIAs who may or may not be over there. I mean, I think that we need that accounting before we can go forward. It will not be accepted by the American people, and it shouldn't necessarily be accepted unless we know better what happened and have some sort of resolution to that question, which burns in the hearts of a lot of families. I mean, I don't think any of us know exactly what to make of the recent report that came out of Harvard, I guess, Steve Morris. It's being reviewed now by the Defense Department, and the President has sent General Vesey to Vietnam this week, and I think he's there right now to bring this up with the Vietnamese, but clearly the president is open to normalize relations, which can also, be good for America and be good for Vietnam if we can get some resolution to this issue.
So that issue is the primary reason.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I am profoundly dissatisfied with this administration's failure to respond more forcefully and in a more timely fashion to the aggression in Bosnia. For a year now, I've been seeing it, reading about it in the... Well, I guess many people here understand and know the story, whether reading the papers as I do or watching it on television. Even Mr. Owen now has finally come out and called for selective bombing to interdict supply lines. Specifically, why not safe havens? Why not a restrained, selective bombing? Yes, bombing to interdict supply lines and to protect those safe havens and to suppress artillery fire. And why not couple that with moving to allow Bosnians to arm themselves if that doesn't work? I think that's would be a significant step and a significant threat to the, and by the way, there are still some ethnic Serbs who are with the Bosnian government. I would wonder if our policy is really appropriately held hostage to the survival of a politician in the Soviet Union, namely Boris Yeltsin, which it certainly seems to be the argument that's being put out in the press. What is it going to take? What is this administration waiting for?
It's a good question about an impossible problem. I guess when you think about Bosnia, I think the first thing you see and think is that this is truly a tragedy. I mean, a human and a moral tragedy. I mean, there are, I know you recommend a lot of things in your question that seem, at first blush to be an answer. And maybe they are. But we're dealing with a very difficult, fractured society where there is no certainty of a military success, even if you chose, say, to bomb or to suppress artillery. I mean, it's not always clear what the next step is after that. And even on the question of lifting the arms embargo, which the president has also been pressing for, and which the president has talked to our allies about, you face the very real objections raised by many that say that maybe this will simply increase the killing to no good end. I'm not judging it one way or the other, but there are there are very difficult questions involved in all of that at the same time. Who can stand by when every single night we all face pictures of babies being thrown into trucks in some hope of getting out, or of women being raped, or of a true massacre and ethnic cleansing going on? And I would just say that we have not stood by. The president has pressed for the enforcement of the no-fly zone in the UN. That has been voted on, that has been enforced. The president has pressed for humanitarian missions and making sure that we get as much food as we can into the area. The president has worked with our allies for a first sanctions resolution, is now working on a tougher sanctions resolution, and he's engaged right now on discussions with our allies over the lifting of the arms embargo and other possible options. But I think that there are an awful lot of questions to be answered on this, and no easy way out, but that doesn't make it any easier to watch what is happening or to accept what is happening. I know that's not a perfect answer. I just have to confess I don't have one. I don't think we have one. But
the Clinton administration is committed to pushing for lifting the arms embargo.
We've been working with our allies on that. As you know, there's an awful lot of resistance to that in other countries and with our allies.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nelson Rainieri. I'm a second-year Master's in Public Administration student. I'd be curious to hear your views with respect to your role as Communications Director. Specifically, how has the way you view that position changed prior to you getting in there, and now as you reach the 100 days? And also, any thoughts as to the question of how you're able to drive what the news, the print, and the electronic media put on
How many,
TV?
I'm sorry.
How you're able to drive the agenda of the news media, if you are able at all?
Not very well. I don't know if I had any expectations of it, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's not something. We were very determined in the campaign. We're very, very superstitious, first of all. Most of all, James. I don't know if you read the stories about him. He has a different superstition for each campaign, and this one he wore his shirt inside out for the last 10 days and a pair of black gloves. My own superstition was that I refused to think about the day after the election. I just wouldn't ever do it and wouldn't talk about it. I mean, I ignored the transition. I just had an iron wall. There was no way I was going to think about anything after November 4th. So they kind of just plunged into it without any expectations whatsoever. I think I've learned a lot in the last few months. You learn a lot about how to answer questions. You learn more about how not to answer questions. I think I've learned that it is difficult, much more difficult in an administration where a lot of things happen and where you're responsible for making things happen, to control a public agenda than you can in a campaign where, you know, in the campaign you can set yourself up in opposition to something or say you're for something and then move on. You can change the subject. You can't change the subject. When you're in government, the subject is often given. You can try. I mean, it just doesn't work that often. But that's been the hardest thing to get used to, and actually to get used to the limits of the communications role. So that's about it. Hope I'll have more to say in the next 100 days.
I'm also here to voice my concern about the situation in Bosnia. Presently, after the enforcement of the no-fly zone, the Serbs responded by shelling Srebrenica, and in 15 minutes of shelling, they killed 56 people, as reported by the Boston Globe. 14 of them were children. Why aren't we and the United Nations in general taking a more active role in trying to stop Serbian aggression? Particularly and specifically, why aren't we using airstrikes to take out their heavy artillery, which has been responsible for about 90% of the killings that have gone on there? And also, why aren't we lifting the arms embargo and denying Bosnia the right for self-defense?
I think it's the same question, Bren. You know, all I can do is say that, you know, it's something we're deeply concerned about as well. We have been doing what we can. It has not fully worked, which is why we're trying to do more and in consultations now.
You mentioned the no-fly zone, and like I said, the Serbs obviously didn't care much about it. Why aren't we trying to enforce no artillery zones, which are responsible for the killings? They don't seem to be using their air power to do the damage anymore. It's mostly ground fire and mortars and rockets like that, rocket launchers and stuff like that. Why aren't we using air power to take those out?
Again, it's something we're discussing right now. There have been objections from our allies, but the president said yesterday that now may be the time to consider certain things that before had been unacceptable. And so we're doing a complete review. I have nothing new to announce right now.
Hi, my name is Gil Lahav. I'm currently a student of philosophy here, but I also went through Columbia's core curriculum, so I know you did some philosophy. And I have two ethical questions for you. First, I'd first like you to imagine a scenario in which the interests of the nation and Americans in general, in moral and/or practical terms, conflict with the interests of the president you serve. With whom would you side, and why? That's question one. Question two. Question two, I'd like you to discuss the ethics of breaking campaign pledges after being elected.
What was the second one?
Discuss the ethics of breaking campaign pledges after being elected.
Well, I mean, I guess the first question is actually pretty easy to answer. If it was in the interest of the country, it would be in the interest of the president to do it, so there wouldn't be a conflict.
That's the easy way out.
That's the only answer. The second question, it's actually kind of an interesting question because we did something different last year, a little bit different. I mean, we had a book that was, 500 pages long called Putting People First. And there are a lot of statements in that book, and they keep coming back at us. And I think that clearly it's impossible to implement everything you say in a campaign. It's just simply not possible. I mean, I think Governor Mario Cuomo says you campaign in poetry and you have to govern in prose, and that's true. But that what you have to do is make the choices. One thing I would caution against when you ask that kind of a question is that there's something that's happened, I think this year especially, and also it has something to do with modern research. And when, in the course of a campaign over 12 months, the president says, literally thousands of things. And now, because of the way in the past, you might give some accommodation for campaign rhetoric or something. Now it's all on a nexus and it's easily brought up and they can throw back any statement at you at any time. And it's something we have to get used to too and be more careful of. But not every campaign promise or campaign commitment is the equivalent of read my lips, and cannot be treated as if it were. I mean, you do what you can. You set out the goals that you must, but then you have to set priorities. And simply because you don't achieve something within a certain time frame, whether it's the first week or the first month or the first 100 days, doesn't mean that you've given up on the commitment, but you do have to face reality where it stands. I mean, you can say that has to make you more careful about campaign promises, and certainly it does. There are a million things I wish I didn't say during the campaign, but it's not possible to achieve every goal immediately, and we have to make the choices that we have to make.
Okay, but with respect to the first question, is it the case that you think it's inconceivable that President Clinton could do something immoral, or do you simply refuse to speculate on how you would behave in that situation?
Everybody makes mistakes, and I'm certain that we're all going to make mistakes, and when we make them, we'll tell you and we'll make up for them.
Okay.
My name is Paul Soprano. I'm a student in the continuing ed program here at Harvard. I'd like to talk to you about, ask you about two of your early PR successes. First one's a statement.
Only two?
The second one is a question. The first one, we had this thing about the little track going around the White House and how they really played that out of proportion. We have a very, very proud tradition that we're going to be doing here for the 97th year on Monday, on Patriots Day, and that's the Boston's Marathon. Now, we know the president can't come up here and run, but we could bring part of the Boston Marathon back to him. I have an extra large.
All right.
Boston Marathon t-shirt.
How about a small?
I don't mean to ask you to be the messenger, but perhaps you could bring that back to him.
Good, at least he'll think my trip was worthwhile.
The second one is a question. It's the mother of all phobias in the military, and that's allowing homosexuals in. It's very easy, at a flick of a pen, by executive order, to bring homosexuals in and mainstream them with the rest of the military community.
No, it's not. It's just not.
I'm an infantryman in the Army National Guard. I've been to many bases, and I've recognized an overwhelming resistance. It comes down to education. It comes down to an enlightenment among the troops that just does not happen overnight. Perhaps you might be able to provide part of your game plan, and how are we able to bring this across to the military? This is not something that you're going to be able to.
Let me take the first part of your question first. It's not easy, and you can't do it, and that's why it's not done. I mean, yes, the president can sign the order, and the very next day the Senate can overturn it. Nothing has happened. Zero. And for all of the work and all of the effort and all of the blood spilled and all the pain, will be exactly where we are today. So the fundamental premise of your question isn't right. But beyond that, I mean, the way you do it is by speaking to it. I mean, and that's what the president will do. That's why we're studying. I mean, the president has to balance his very real belief that you should not have any discrimination in the military, something he's gone out on a limb for and paid a political price for. I would point out, I mean, in fact, one of the reasons I remember this forum so well is that it was in this room from this podium on October 30th, 1991, that the President for the first time made the commitment to sign an executive order to end discrimination against gays in the military. But there is a balance he has to achieve, is the balance between achieving that goal, which he wants to achieve and which he will do everything he can to achieve, and maintaining order and morale and discipline in the military. And you address those questions. How do you foster a spirit of tolerance? I don't think we do it by assuming that people in the military are bad, or by assuming that they're impossible to deal with. That's not going to get us anywhere. You have to do it by addressing them on their terms as well as your own. And that's what the President's committed to doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nader Barzin. I am a special student here at Harvard from the Institute of Political Studies of Paris. My question is concerning your administration's communication strategy on Iran. Many scholars here believe that the United States and Iran are entering a phase of spiral conflict, and particularly for domestic reasons, there's not much incentive for either party to take a step and try to control this process. But I'm wondering if
Control which process?
this spiral conflict process, at least a psychological aspect of it, because there's nothing real going on except some real cooperation, actually, as far as the firms are concerned. So what I'm wondering, if your administration would welcome the intervention of an unofficial third party, maybe in an academic setting, to try to have some direct discussion between the two governments.
The flip answer I want to give, it sounds like something that's been tried before, but we cannot have normal relations with Iran until their support for international terrorism is ended, until they stop exporting weapons of mass destruction across the world. It's as simple as that. When that stops, we can talk.
My name is Sofia Lengyel, and I've been recently appointed to be the president of the Hungarian-American Chamber of Commerce of New England, with the mission of promote business between New England and Eastern Europe. Mr. Stephanopoulos, it appears that the U.S. economy and job development is depending a great deal on international trade, and also that the Eastern European market is seen as a growing potential. I'd like to know if the Clinton administration is planning to set up any federal programs to support and fund or assist any other way small and medium-sized companies to enter the Eastern European arena.
Absolutely, and we're doing it through the Export-Import Bank and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. We want very much to have expanded trade and investment opportunities in Eastern Europe. And in fact, I know that the President is meeting this week with President Havel of Czech Republic, and Lech Walesa of Poland. They're coming into town for the opening of the Holocaust Memorial, but it's something this administration clearly is committed to. Thanks. Can't see.
Yeah, hi. My name is Zishan Zaidi. I'm a freshman at the college and a member of the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics, and we're really happy to have you here. My question has to do with one of the biggest criticisms of your administration, which is its handling of foreign policy. And I'm not talking here about any specific issue, but the general approach. And I think an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago put it really well. What the author was saying was that rather than having a coherent, well thought out picture, vision of the world order, and having a set of goals which it pursues to achieve that world order, it appears that the administration seems to be simply reacting to whatever comes up. that it waited until Yeltsin was under siege to react to the Russian issue, waited until the events in Bosnia got out of hand to react to that situation. And what the author was saying was that although President Clinton has made it clear that domestic issues are his priority, the U.S. owes more to the world than that. How do you respond to that? And as an insider, could you tell us how exactly foreign policy issues are being dealt with, and if they are being dealt with in a manner other than what this author was saying?
Yeah, I disagree, but let me just point out that, and the president's been president for 80 days, and the situation in Bosnia was out of control before he took office and as he took office. The situation in Russia was something that he spoke on well over a year ago, and he's very clearly articulated his goals. He said, not only in the campaign, but since he's been president, that we have three fundamental premises in our foreign policy. One, that foreign policy and domestic policy are interconnected. Two, that we have to have a foreign policy that promotes two goals: global growth, because that is the only if we're helping the world get richer can we ourselves get richer, and can we have any hope of achieving the third goal, which is the democratic development and the growth of democracies around the world, because we believe that democracies tend not to fight with each other, and that will lead to a safer and more prosperous world. And that is precisely the goals that we've been working for since he took office. I mean, it's not every president who in their first 80 days has a summit with a Russian leader and comes forward at a time of great fiscal constraint in the United States with first a $1.6 billion aid program for partnership with Russia, and then also goes with his allies, presses to make sure the meeting in Tokyo on aid to Russia would have never happened with the G7 if the president hadn't pushed for it, had not been on the phone with our allies, making sure that we all addressed the fundamental question of Russian reform. I think it's just the criticism simply isn't true. On Bosnia, the president has also been actively engaged, and as I said one more time, getting the no-fly zone, getting the sanctions resolutions, and even as we speak, has been moving forward to try and work with our allies on greater measures. So we do have a strategy. It's based on promoting growth and democracy, and we've been doing everything we can to further that strategy consistent with our domestic goals.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Janet Thompson. I'm with the class of '87 MPA. My question is, the Clinton campaign stressed a great deal, change is now, and its time has come. Over the last 100 to 150 years, we have been subsidizing, probably appropriately, extraction of resources. However, we've moved beyond the industrial age into the informational age. I am not aware that in the current Clinton budget, or it's my belief that in the current Clinton budget, as it's been presented, does not appear to adequately address the subsidies in the natural resource area. Do you...
What do you mean by that?
That the budget is not, I guess, let me give you my question. Will the president take on the challenge of restructuring the subsidies to match our needs in the 21st century rather than the needs that were necessary for the 19th century? And specifically, those natural resource areas like below-cost timber sales on federal lands, grazing, mining, and similar issues.
Okay, now I know what you meant. Yes, I mean, he's moving forward through the Interior Department on the grazing fee issue. Secretary Babbitt is going to work on that, and will be coming forward with the restructuring the grazing fees over the next several months. On mining, he is working with Senator Bennett Johnston, the chairman of the Energy and Resources Committee, to restructure the hard rock mining program. And in fact, on the timber sales, the president, as you may know, right before he went to the Vancouver summit, held a day-long conference with the vice president on the Forest Conference in Portland, Oregon, to come up with a coordinated administration approach to the problems of balancing our need to continue to develop the forests with our need to protect the wildlife, most particularly the spotted owl that live there. We understand the dilemmas involved in these issues, and we're trying to come up with a balanced approach, particularly on the forest, but the President is committed on the grazing fee and mining issue.
Hi, my name is Bob Levy. I'm an MPA graduate, 1988. I'm also an MD specializing in tropical medicine. I live in the South Florida area, and we're very concerned of what's happening in Cuba right now. Many people are going blind due to nutritional deficiencies. There's a run on vitamins in the markets of Miami because people are trying to send vitamins to Cuba. The populace there has been told to eat leaves as a way of trying to stem this nutritional problem. How do you reconcile the embargo on Cuba with the humanitarian need to help the populace who are really the victims?
It's a tough question. I would say, though, that the blame for that has to lie, first of all, at the feet of Fidel Castro. I mean, our policy is simple. We are prepared to do what we can to help Cuba if Fidel Castro is prepared to loosen the grip on his own people. And I think there's always a tough question in cases like this that we lose sight of who's to blame. And in this case, Fidel Castro is clearly the person to blame. At the same time, we're not going to stand by as people are dying. And I mean, I think that I don't know what the provisions are for certain humanitarian needs, but I'm certain that there are some escape hatches for that. But clearly, you can't blame the president who's trying to further a policy which is going to help the Cuban people, which is going to open up opportunities to the Cuban people and will provide for a better situation. If Fidel Castro will loosen his grip, he's the one who's punishing them. Got it. Thanks a lot.
One of one of the advantages of being dean is you get to spend some time with people like George Stephanopoulos. One of the disadvantages is you have to call wonderful forums like this to a halt so he can make his plane. We're all grateful to you for coming back, and we expect you to be back here often again. Thank you.